Very nice to talk to you again. You've mentioned that you've got some special objects from your career. This series is all about sport in 100 objects. What's the first one you're going to show us?
Well, the first one I'm going to show you actually is from the long days before my broadcasting career began. And I decided in 1978, for reasons, I think there was an element of chercher la femme, because there was a girl at university who was an American exchange student who was doing medicine. And she said Lisa, and I think she called herself Liza, actually, as she would, with a Z, not Lisa with an S. But anyway, and she was from New Orleans, and it was kind of, the incentive was ultimately to end up in New Orleans. But I thought it was a golden opportunity in the summer of 1978 to backpack around America, or to get on Greyhound buses, which, you know, in a real Simon and Garfunkel kind of way. And I had an amazing time. I mean, I really did, going to some extraordinary places. And actually, also, can I actually say this? And I don't think I've ever said this ever, or told anyone. I actually ended up sitting next door to O.J. Simpson on a plane. Yeah, but I had absolutely no idea, on a plane from Philadelphia to Atlanta. I had absolutely no idea who he was. So I didn't ask him anything about himself. He just asked me what it was like being a student in England. And then I got off the plane, and everybody rushed up to me as I was waiting for my rucksack on the carousel. Going, what did he say? What did he say? And I said, what did who say? And they said, OJ. And I said, OJ who? Because you wouldn't have known. Because in those days, you know, American football hadn't permeated British society yet. And so I said, well, he didn't really say very much. And they looked at me like I was some kind of lunatic. Honestly, I don't think I've ever said that. But anyway, that was an extraordinary, well, I mean, it was an extraordinary, it actually wasn't remotely extraordinary at all to me. It completely passed me by. I had no interest whatsoever. But subsequently, it became more interesting, obviously. But anyway, so I landed in New Orleans, and I went to Lisa's house. And there was a note on the door saying that she'd had to go to the hospital and do some training or whatever for all day. So sorry that she wasn't there to meet me. She'd be back at 6, but you know, just amuse yourself for the next 9 hours. So there I was in New Orleans with my guidebook and my rucksack. So I left the rucksack in her porch, and I walked into New Orleans, and I do remember being stopped by a policeman because I was conspicuous on my own and all that. I remember being stopped somewhere by a policeman saying, I really, if I was you, wouldn't be around here on your own. I really, really wouldn't. And I said, oh, okay. So I turned around and walked in diametrically the opposite direction. And then I suddenly saw this absolute mass of humanity queuing. And it's a bit like the old Max Boyce joke about, you know, seeing the queue and ending up in Tesco. But so I followed the queue, and I joined the queue. And but I joined the queue when I didn't know what I was joining it for. And I said, so what are we all here for? And this guy looked at me again. I was getting used to this by this point. This guy looked at me again as though I was some kind of lunatic, and said, Muhammad Ali, training session. And I went, really? Oh my God. And the fact that, you know, I mean, if you forget, because you do forget, no mobile phones, no anything, no blah, blah, blah. So you could quite happily live in a vacuum, traveling around America, and a new president could have been elected, but unless you were watching it on somebody's television, because you didn't have any means of accessing things, you wouldn't have known. Anyway, so I said, oh God. And I suddenly then twigged, I realized he was fighting Leon Spinks at some point, but I hadn't realized it was only 48 hours away. Anyway, so I queued, got into this gymnasium in downtown New Orleans, and saw Ali spar. I can't remember how many rounds it was, but the thing about it was, what made it so memorable was he then got a microphone in the middle of the ring and did a Q&A session, you know, literally going, you guy at the back, what do you want to say? And he, you know, and then it was just an amazing hour and a half or so that he just commanded it was just extraordinary. I mean, genuinely, I can, as I'm telling you this, I can see it. I can see all the, I just feel it and see the contours of where the gymnasium was. And then I managed to get to see the fight on Saturday night at the New Orleans Superdome. But the thing I'm going to show you is actually I bought the T-shirt, which has the third coming on it, because, you know, Ali is going to be world champion for the third time. And I've never worn it. And it sat at the bottom of one of my drawers for in various houses and in various incarnations in various parts of the UK for, what is that now? I hate to think it, 43 years. But I've never worn it, but I've still kept it. But what it did do, actually, the old cliche about getting the t-shirt, I have become a bit of an obsessive person over the last 40 years going to big sporting events, of always buying a t-shirt. So I've got loads and loads and loads of t-shirts, most of which I've never worn and which just sit there. And occasionally, I do think actually, as and when, if, you know, the next house move, is that the moment to just sling them all out? Are they not just, I think I keep the Ali one. I know I keep the Ali one. But a lot of the other ones, you think, really? There's a vanity thing that I'd quite like to try them on to see if I could actually fit it. but I think it might be time to suddenly just erase a lot of those things and just ditch them.
The thing is, if you say you could say you've never fitted them if they're brand new.
Well, I suppose that's true. Yes, but I always bought them on the pretext that I was going to wear them, and then when I got home, I just thought actually they look quite cool in their pristine condition. You know, I've got other bits and bobs from, you know, the Rugby World Cup in 2003 in Australia when England won. I've got loads of stuff from there that I've never worn, like caps and things like that, that just sit there almost like some sort of, I'm waiting when all things go wrong, of course, I'm just going to open a memorabilia shop. That's what it boils down to. I'm going to move to the Northumbria coast and open a sporting memorabilia shop.
Fantastic. All those sporting memories as well, though. When you saw Muhammad Ali in New Orleans, had you already got your career path fixed in your mind? When did you sort of decide you were going to become a sports broadcaster?
Well, it's kind of linked actually to going back long before that, because I mean, if I say I was seeing Ali then, and then, I mean, you know, for me, 21 years later, being one of the joint presenters of Sports Personality of the Century and interviewing Muhammad Ali. And then, so if that's like tier 3 in modern parlance, and tier 2 was seeing him fight, tier 1, you know, one of the earliest memories I ever have from being brought up in the Far East and so being very dependent on radio. We didn't have a telly, so being very dependent on radio to bring sport to you. I always remember my dad waking me up one morning, I can't remember, you know, it was 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, whatever it was, saying, we've got to listen to Cassius Clay against Sonny Liston, the second fight, which only lasted a round, or didn't even last a round. And so kind of Clay, Ali, was one of the first, I don't know, templates, if you like, of my sporting interests. And my dad was very involved in sport. He was an amateur boxing referee, but rugby was his great passion and things like that. And my mum was a very good tennis and hockey player. And so you kind of always had sport in the house. And then one day in, I think it was 1969, or it might have been early 70 actually. Anyway, there was an Ashes tour in 1970, I think. Was Ray Illingworth England captain? Was it 69, 70?
71, I think. 71, was it?
Was it 71? Was it Ashes?
John Snow, Ray Illingworth captain.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, didn't Bob Willis go out on that tour as a replacement? Anyway, whenever it was. But a guy called Alan Gibson, who was, I think he was the first ever voice on Test Match Special in 1949. Anyway, but he was a cricket correspondent and rugby guy. He'd been at the Western Morning News in Plymouth when my dad had been down there, and they'd become very good mates. And he came around for dinner one night, and he just spoke about what it was like to go on an Ashes tour. And obviously I wasn't remotely interested in all the bars that he was talking about, but it did occur to me that watching sport for a living and generally just sitting in the sun and writing, because I loved words and I loved books, was quite a good gig. So I remember, again, little moments, snapshots of life that you remember. I do remember that dinner party when Alan Gibson came round, and I'm not saying, you know, something, but just thought, that's not a bad idea. And I do remember going into school and asking if I could contribute something to the school magazine, which I then went on to edit. And I think kind of by 15, no, maybe 16, I'd kind of just, all I wanted to do was write. I mean, that really was, I just wanted to write for a national newspaper. And so I edited the school newspaper, I edited the university newspaper, and then desperately, I graduated at just the wrong time in terms of the newspaper industry, because Margaret Thatcher had just come to power, and one of her first battles was with the print unions, and a lot of local newspapers went west in 1979. And there used to be 2 evening papers in Bristol. You'll remember that. And there used to be 2 in Nottingham and places like that. And evening papers were really starting to struggle. And I was just applying for jobs anywhere and everywhere and just getting endless rejections and getting very, very despondent. So I decided to go to Cardiff University to do a year's journalism postgrad, and then went through the process again afterwards, and it kind of went from there.
Where was your first radio job then?
My first radio job was at Radio Lincolnshire, and I was on the local paper up there. I went into a pub called the Whig and Mitre. Pubs for some reason play a considerable part in this progression. But anyway, and there were a couple of guys in there from the local radio station, and they just said, "Hey, there's a job going. You ought to apply for it." And actually, in the back of my mind, BBC Radio Devon was about to open, and I had it in my head that I was going to try and apply to go down there, because I've been born in Plymouth. We'd gone back there intermittently over the years because my dad was in the Navy. And I always thought, just starting, people had always said to me, when Radio Lincolnshire had started, and I'd met all the people who were starting the radio station, they all said it was the most exciting thing they'd ever done in their lives. It was just exhilarating. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to start a radio station? So in my head, I thought, I'll apply for the job at Radio Devon in 6 months' time, but I'll go for this job at Lincolnshire, which I won't get, but at least I'll have experienced the BBC interview procedure. And then that will stand me in good stead for, what I really want. And then, of course, they offered me the damn job, and, a bird in the hand and all that sort of stuff. So I thought, I've got to take it. And I was there for another 4.5 years, so the Devon plan had to be shelved. But I was very lucky. I had the most amazing time. And I, across all the things from anything in radio or television terms, I do look back, what was the single most fun thing ever to do in our industry was do a breakfast show on local radio. I just can't, in terms of pure unmitigated fun, once you've put to one side the alarm clock going off at 4:20, but once you've said, okay, that kind of goes with the job, it was just a blast, an absolute blast, and I loved it.
So you began as a presenter or as a reporter, or?
No, I was a reporter, I was a producer. I mean, you were everything. You were absolutely everything whatever was required. And I think, it's awful to say you were playing at it, but I think there was a huge part, certainly for the first couple of years, where I actually thought, I can't really believe I'm doing this. And I think that, again, everything goes back to, show me the child for the first 7 years and I'll show you the man. I think the importance that radio had in my childhood, because we hadn't had telly, the idea that what I'd been doing, listening to football matches under the bedclothes, I know it's a cliche, but you used to do it, you used to do it. And then suddenly be doing it, I mean, living out in the Far East, one of the highlights of the week was the top 20 at 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning. And everybody used to gather around a huge, I mean, it was huge, like a sort of, it's wireless on steroids, it was just a massive thing that it preceded beatboxes by like 30 years. But at 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning, everybody used to gather around the swimming pool and put the top 20 on, because that was I think was certainly for the adults, it was hanging on to home and hearing the Beatles and the Stones and whatever else it might be, and for the youngsters it was obviously cool and hip and all that sort of stuff. And so I'm sure those are all subliminal things that are planted in your head, and then suddenly 20 years later you're doing it, not doing that. You may not be doing the top 20 rundown. And that's actually the only regret I have in my career is I never got to do the charts, just once. I would just love to have done that. But you just take it on, and I'm sure there was a long period there where I thought, God, am I really doing this? Am I really doing this? although, initially you were nervous as a kitten because, it's a very, actually, what we're doing now. I mean, I think interesting that everybody now could almost be a broadcaster because everybody's been living on Zoom for so long now that everybody's quite happy to do this. And in the knowledge that you're broadcasting to 1 or 10 or 100 people. But the first time you get in front of a microphone, I don't know what you felt about it, but I remember, I'm sitting at a desk now, but I was holding on to the desk because I actually thought my whole body was just going to disintegrate, because I wasn't going to be able to form the sentence. And the very first ever sports bulletin I had to do, which was at 5:45 on Radio Lincolnshire on a Tuesday evening, not that I remember it. And there was a local football item. Well, there was a local football club, which, even after being there for 4 years was a bit of a struggle to say. But getting this in your first ever sports bulletin, there was a football team near Scunthorpe called Appleby Frodingham.
Oh, yes.
That's very easy to mess up, especially if you're nervous and you don't form the mouth. Appleby, get it out. So if you go, oh dear, it was a horror. I couldn't get out of the studio quickly.
But obviously it went very, very well, and you then had an opportunity of joining national radio. How did that come about?
I just saw a job, and I asked the station manager, could I go for it? And so I went down to Radio 2 as a producer for 4 months. Then they decided they didn't want me, so they sent me back again. So I went back down again, and then I got sent back again, and then I went back down again, and then they decided they did want me eventually. But it was a long old haul, and I did think actually, I do remember in the summer of '86 thinking that might be it. That I wasn't going to get any further. Local radio was going to be it. In which case, what did I want to do? Did I want to go and work for Radio Cumbria or Carlisle or whatever it's called in those days? And or was I going to try to go back to Radio Devon? I kind of felt my ambitions had gone by then. And then out of the blue, they rang me up. I think because obviously somebody was ill or whatever. Or '86 would have been. Was that '86 World Cup? Yeah, where was the World Cup in '86?
The Football World Cup.
Yeah. Golly. Anyway, maybe I can't remember. Yeah. Anyway, that's ridiculous. How can I not remember that?
Yeah.
Mexico. Was it Mexico in '86? Okay, right. Anyway, so obviously suddenly people were required to go off to, Central America, and I got a phone call saying, "Would you like to come back for another 4 months?" And I said, "Yeah, you bet." And it kind of went from there.
As a presenter, or this is now as a reporter presenter, or
this actually was doing the sport on the Today program on Radio 4.
Oh, right,
every morning. So and it's funny how the worm turns, or in some cases doesn't turn at all. Gary Richardson was doing it then, and he's still doing it now.
Yes, that's. The longevity of so many of the people who were in BBC Radio Sport then is remarkable in one sense, isn't it? Was it a good place to go to and work? I felt it was a welcoming team sort of place.
Yeah, for me, it was just very exciting as well to be in London. I know that makes you sound like a complete Johnny Townmouse, but and listen, Lincoln is a great place. I love it, and in fact, I've grown to love Lincolnshire more as the years have gone by, realizing what a fantastic place it is. And just to go off at a slight tangent, actually, people always say it's a bit flat, Lincolnshire. I remember the first ever job I had to do was I had to go to Mablethorpe, up on the furthermost point of the East Coast, to do a piece with a bloke who reckoned that he'd learned how to fly. He was going to be the first man who'd learned how to fly. This was with a guy called Ken James, who was the chief photographer at the Echo. So we drove all the way to Mablethorpe, and this guy had built a kind of diving board thing near Mablethorpe Beach that he was going to just run up this. He was going to run up it, and then when he got to the end, he was going to go like this with this contraption that he had, and he was going to fly across to Holland. Well, of course, he didn't. Anyway, so I had to write a piece about this for the Echo, and we drove back, And once we'd exhausted the absurdity of this guy's ambitions, Ken said to me, "What do you think of Lincolnshire?" And I said, "Well, it's a bit flat, isn't it? I mean, I'd only been there 24 hours. And he just said to me, "Yeah," he said, "but there's an awful lot of sky." And I said, "Yeah." And genuinely, from that day to this, I'm a real nerd when it comes to clouds. I just love clouds. I love watching them. And I used to love going down to the Wash and the flattest parts of the UK, right down near Hull Beach. And as you're heading almost into the border with Norfolk, that area there, all the real fenland. Any job that was going, I always went down there. I'd always volunteer to do it because I used to love just driving down there and sometimes just stopping once you've done the job and just watching and just going, whoa, this is just the scale, the expanse of this is just amazing. But anyway, so you go from that to suddenly you're in London and it's like, whoa, run, get on the train. Like, how exciting to get on the district line and all that, and I just loved it. There's just the buzz of being there. And also the sense of there actually weren't that many people doing it. I mean, I think I have no idea how many people work for BBC Sport these days, but it's going to be in the hundreds and hundreds. But in those days, there weren't that many because, there was BBC One, there was a bit of BBC Two. We did the sport occasionally on Radio 2, but that was it. Yeah. So you did feel that you were special because there were so few of you.
Yeah.
And the bizarre thing is, I mean, anybody listening to this or watching this who, remembers listening to radio in those days will be staggered. I mean, absolutely staggered to hear that from 7:05 in the evening until 5 to 10 the next morning, there was only one person on duty in the office. And if that was you, that was you. Yes. And it was. And so all those overnight shifts where you'd go to bed at 2 because you thought nothing was just going to happen after that. And you'd get up at 5 and you'd have 3 hours sleep. And there was always this thing about, I'll go and get a cup of tea. But there was always this thought, and in those days, I mean, there was no receptionist. This sounds like something from, some prehistoric era. But there was nobody to answer the phone as such. It was just you. And there was always this thought, if I go to the canteen and get a cup of coffee, that might be the moment when the phone rings and Bobby Robson's ringing to say he's just resigned as England manager. But if you're not there to answer it, no one's going to know. So there was a huge sense of responsibility that you were the department until somebody happened to wander in it, just before 10 o'clock in the morning. So, but again, happy days. But I do look back on those days as well, thinking, how much experience did I really have? The responsibility you were given really was huge, and no mobile phones or anything. So, if you needed advice for somebody and you rang them at home and they weren't there, what did you do then? The food chain or the command chain didn't really exist as such in the way that we would just take it all for granted now,
And you did. What I was going to ask, when Radio 5 Live came along, or Radio 5 as it was just then, that really changed the whole nature of sports radio broadcasting, didn't it? Because it was suddenly it demanded much more from everybody.
Yeah, and it also was an opportunity to change the way that it was done from a much greater informality. And it seemed to me that, I mean, the first time I ever did sport on 2, as it was on a Saturday afternoon, I was given reams of paper and I said, what are all these for? And it said, for sports report at 5 o'clock, which is the roundup of all the news. It said, Manchester United have gone 3 points clear at the top of the First Division after a victory over Everton. Next sheet. Manchester United have gone 1 point clear after drawing with Everton. Manchester United, another one. Man United missed the chance of going top of the First Division after losing it. And I'm thinking, sorry, if I can't do this off the top of my head, I shouldn't be doing the job. You need somebody else in because it's ridiculous. The whole thing about what we're doing is we're responding to what's happening and we're giving of ourselves, which was not also in those days liked at all. And so I said, look, just please, no paper. And if I can't do it, just get someone else to do it. But you've just got to be on it. You've got to be thinking it. You've got to be you've got everything in your head. Who's playing? You might You'd have a few notes, but that's about it. You're just doing it on the fly. And that immediately changes the tenor, the timbre, and the feel of what the radio sounds like. And so when Radio 5 Live started, I said, why couldn't we just do the same thing with news? Why does it have to be so formulaic? Why can't it just be on the fly? Let's just see how it goes. Because it's, you know, a change in the council tax in Derbyshire is more important than, some people say it isn't, it's more important than whether Derby County have just beaten Nottingham Forest. But why can't you treat the two the same in the terms of the way that you present it? And, you know, radio now is very, in terms of speech radio, is very, very different now to how it was 30 years ago.
And you started in sport, and then you did drive time, didn't you, just for a long time?
Yeah, I did, and I loved it. I did it every day. But the thing about, you know, I mean, being utterly, I mean, part of me didn't want to stop doing it, but at the same time, people were starting to offer me lots of opportunities to do fun things. And the great thing about doing a daily radio show is you can't ring in the morning and say, look, I tell you what, I won't come in today, but I'll do it tomorrow. Or, you know, I know it starts at 4, but how about if I got in at 5? You know, it doesn't. It's so rigid in terms of how it has to be, obviously. And I'm, as a listener, I am incandescent when somebody that I listen to on a regular basis takes a week's holiday. I'm going, what? You can't, who is this idiot they've got on replacing you? You know, a radio presenter becomes part of your life on a daily basis. And when some randomer comes in and just spoils the rhythm, I'm incensed, you know. So you couldn't after, you have to commit or you don't commit. And I was just lucky that people were offering me lots of other stuff and whatnot. And in the end, I just thought, you know, I've got to let it go and go off and lead a very freelancey kind of world, which obviously comes with its problems as well, because, you know, it can sometimes be feast and sometimes it can be famine, but it offers you the opportunity to go and do an awful lot more things, which obviously by the very nature of a daily radio show are limited.
Do you prefer television or radio?
I'll say they're very different mediums. They are cricket and baseball. They really are. And everybody says, oh, they're just about the same, but they're not. Radio is a very singular. Radio is about you. Yeah. Television is about us. Because on television, and you know every bit as well, you are an integral part of a jigsaw, whether it's the director, whether it's the producer, whether it's all the VT people, everything else. There are so many elements to it. And yes, the responsibility falls to you in regard to what you have to do, but there are so many other elements that have to work in tandem. And also, you can be made to look pretty damn silly when something else goes wrong that is nothing to do with you at all. So that can be frustrating, but you have to accept that sometimes you make a bad mistake, which makes them look stupid. So it has to be. I mean, I think television is a great workers' cooperative, but radio is a very personal thing. It's you and the microphone and the listeners. You know, radio is the ultimate we thing. One of my personal absolute pet hates in radio. And obviously, as one gets older, one gets more and more cantankerous and more irritated by these things. But when people say, my guest today on the program is, no, our guest today. Radio is a shared experience between the presenter and the listener. It's not just about you, it's about all of us. And, you know, X was telling us earlier on today, when X spoke to us, or when X spoke, little things like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so in answer to the question, I mean, I think it would go back to what we said right at the outset, is that in your heart, what's in your heart? Do you know? And it's always been radio, because it's how I was brought up. You know, just as simple as that. You know, if you had a television there and a radio there, what's in my DNA to switch on? The radio, always, because that's always been there. And I still get one of the great joys, which you can't do at the moment, sadly, but one of the great joys, and there's nothing better than a long car journey in the company of a really good radio program. It's very soothing. It's very there's something very tranquil about it, but something very reassuring, and also, as long as it's a good program, just invigorating and just life affirming. I think I love it.
Radio and television, though, have taken you to most of, if not all of, the big sporting occasions. Is there any one that you feel that you haven't been to that you think, oh, I wish I'd done that, wish I'd been there?
Yeah, but for totally the wrong reasons. I would love to. I love France. I know you love France. I love France. I would love to do the Tour de France in style, which would mean a lot of very long lunches, and just going to some fantastic places all around France for weeks on end. I would just love to do it. I don't want to have to work into the early hours of the morning broadcasting about the damn thing, but I just love to follow it and just sort of just sense it and feel it, you know. And let's put to one side all the rights and wrongs about cycling and everything else. I think it's just as an event, because the great sporting events are the ones that hit you in the heart, that just absolutely, it's about people. The great sporting events are about people, and the Tour de France is about a nation and its people. So that's the one event I would like to do. And it's one of those things, actually, maybe in a couple of years' time or so, maybe I might just do it, just follow it, sadly on 4 wheels, not on 2, but just follow it around, because it would just take you to some great places. It really would.
Of the major events that you have covered, though, which would you have a list of favourites and worst?
Yeah, favourites would be, well, you were out there as well, 95, the Rugby World Cup, for the Mandela Pienaar moment and everything else like that. Cheltenham is one of my sort of spiritual homes to go racing, and being there in '89 to see Desert Orchid win the Gold Cup was just a wonderful moment for me. In the days of absolute excess, I think at the BBC before the accounts took over, Italia 90, and the hotel room I had in Rome, I think they actually could have played the final in it. It was so big. And then somebody realized that this was perhaps pushing the boat a little bit too far. So for Barcelona in the Olympics 2 years later, we actually moved into a room that was about the size of the toilet in the hotel in Rome 2 years earlier. But there is something magical about Olympic Games. I mean, no doubt about it. You know, from the great Olympic Games, which I would say 2012 was, and Sydney was, to the less great ones. I mean, Atlanta, I was 150 yards away from the bomb when it blew up, when it went off in Centennial Park. That was indescribably scary, obviously. And then once that had all been sorted, the way that America showed almost complete indifference to the Olympics that year was enormously frustrating if you were brought up and if you had that Olympic instinct inside you. But it was just basically just an advertising campaign for Coke for 2.5 weeks, and then their complete abrogation, really, of any responsibility for the Paralympic Games a few weeks later was terrible. But when you cover sport, as you know, you play it, you just experience the good and the bad the whole time. And so sport is perennially a microcosm of life from that point of view, and it does take you up. But also sometimes it can leave you feeling very, very desolate, you know, and certainly from a broadcasting point of view, I've had moments where things have gone wrong on air. The repercussions can have a big impact on you, sort of from a mental point of view. You doubt yourself, and you can feel very alone on occasions. But then a fortnight later, something good happens, and you feel up again. So, you know, it is just about, you know, life is a roller coaster. It's really funny when people talk about 2012, and obviously it was an amazing event. I mean, I had absolutely no doubt it was going to be, by the way, because having been to so many Olympics and been lucky to go to so many Olympics, all of which in advance were going to be a disaster and nobody wanted them, and all of which by and large have been great. You know, it was always going to be fine. But, you know, Super Saturday was amazing and what have you. But I mean, it's very commonplace for people now to sort of lose it on air these days. You know, Andy Murray started the trend and it sort of went from there. But it was almost, I you know, had to swallow and wipe a tear away after Zach Purchase and Mark Hunter had lost. They came second in the rowing, and it's amazing. Even now, people talk to me about that, because it was very but there was still this feeling that if you were on air, you had to be a bit sort of, I mean, it was not exactly Alvar Liddell, for God's sake. We had moved on a bit from there, but it was felt that, you know, you had to be very distanced and very, very contained without getting quite so engaged. You know, and these guys they'd won in Beijing. They were, you know, if you were talking about from a betting point of view, they would have been such long odds on, it wouldn't have been true for them to retain their title in London. And every morning at Caversham, or wherever it had been, where the rowing training centre is, every morning since time begun, they'd gone out there, come hail or high water, in the boat, 500, 1,000, 1,500, 500 metres to go, boom, put the afterburners on, we're going to win the gold medal. We're going to be double gold medalists. And on the day, and they were amazingly, in a way that a lot of other people in lots of other sports are not, as you will know from personal experience, they were amazingly welcoming and engaging and helpful throughout that entire process, that entire journey. And they've been great people to deal with on a day in, day out basis. So you really wanted them to win. I know you should always sort of sit back and say, well, I'll watch it objectively and just see how it goes. But actually, you know, you really, really wanted them to win. And everything was going along fine. And at 500 meters, let's go, guys. And it wasn't there. It was like, you know, the handbrake was on for whatever reason. And that expected surge, that Jeremy Guscott change of pace, didn't happen. And so they came second. And they were bereft. I mean, it was like a bereavement doing that interview with them. That they could not, all they could say was they'd let everybody down. For God's sake, they'd won silver medals. You know, they hadn't let anybody down. It's just what happens in sport. But they were so distraught, so lost. They were absolutely lost. And I don't think I'd ever interviewed, and I'd been doing it then for 30 years plus. I don't think I'd ever interviewed anybody who was so alone, even though there were two of them, and there were tens of thousands around, and a zillion watching on television, who were so alone and just lost. And I thought, what the hell do you say? And I didn't do it very well. I mean, you do occasionally look back at it, because people say, you know, I looked at it last week, and yeah. I do. Every time I look back at it, I think, God, you weren't very good that day. But I was just taken aback. You've done 100 million interviews with people who've lost, and you kind of have a way of dealing with it. But it really did feel as though they literally just suffered a bereavement. And what do you say? You know, you almost felt like a policeman going around to somebody's house and giving them bad news. It was just, I thought that. Anyway, so the pictures of which Zach and Mark have signed for me is of the moment of despair, with them in the boat, knowing that they haven't done what I think the key thing is knowing that they haven't achieved what every single second of every minute of every hour of every day of every week of every month they've been thinking of achieving for the last 4 years. They have only thought of that one thing, winning a gold medal in London to back up the victory in Beijing. And every split second of their lives for 4 years has been for that moment. And at that key moment, it didn't happen. Little wonder they were emotionally all over the place. So, and in many ways, I wish I'd cried a bit more with them, you know, because I was caught between trying to be terribly BBC and I must retain my dignity at all costs, and wanting to help them. And I ended up getting caught in the middle and doing neither. But anyway, but it is an unforgettable memory from a truly amazing few weeks.
And that was in a sense a memory of disappointment or sadness. What's the best, exciting, most joyful moment that you were lucky enough to present?
Well, I would probably say Murray winning Wimbledon, only because, you know, I first went to Wimbledon. I queued. First year I queued in 1970. And I had all the years just going as a spectator, and all the years presenting on the radio when we got very excited when a British player got into the second week or even the second round sometimes, you know. And it's 57 years since Fred Perry, it's 58, it's 60, it's 62, it's 64. And I really didn't, I don't know what I thought really. because in a sense, you've become a bit laissez-faire about it now. But I think I probably at some point thought, actually, no British man is ever going to win Wimbledon in my lifetime. Thinking there's not something wrong about that. It's just odd. How can we not produce anybody who can do it? And then, so to be there on centre court when Andy did it, I remember just sort of taking a deep breath, thinking, well, that was 2013. So that was my 27th or 28th Wimbledon for the BBC. And that's a lot of games that you've watched for the BBC, never mind all the games for the preceding years that you hadn't. That's a lot of tennis that you've watched. That's a lot of white and then yellow balls going over nets and British players going to the net and saying, well played to the person who's just thumped them. And it was just great. Whenever I look at people, whenever on the odd moment that I just find myself, and I hate myself for doing it, looking at things on the internet where people are being disparaging about Andy Murray, I just want to say, you are such losers. You really are. Given everything that's happened in his life, and also the unbelievable weight of expectation, a greater weight of expectation on his shoulders than any sportsman in our lifetime has, in any sport, has had to bear. For what he's achieved, how anybody could criticize him, I find unfathomable. I really do. So that was a moment where, you put the microphone down at the end of that day and thought, that genuinely was, in the little world that I inhabit of broadcasting and sport and what have you, that was a pretty big day.
Fantastic. And just those big days, when you present a program that's going to last a long time, talk us through your routine. How do you prepare yourself? How do you actually cope with something that could be sort of 6 or 7 hours or even longer, that you're actually on the air or on the mark, or you have to be focused and concentrated?
I actually don't know. You just do it. You just turn up. And it's going to be a long day. It's going to be a long day. Doing the Open Golf for how many years it was, sometimes those days you could be on air for 12 or 13 hours, non-stop, just talking, and making it up as you go along.
Right.
That's the key thing.
Preparation. How much preparation would you do?
A bit, but not as much as I probably should do. But the key thing is just being on it. Just listen and look the whole time, so that you're picking up bits from anything around you. You just need information that whole time. Often information that just acts as a stalling operation, so that I can't think what on earth I'm going to say. But that is a very interesting red and blue bird over there. I've no idea what sort it is. Is it a chaffinch? I don't know, really. Things like that, which just gives you time to rethink about, well, what am I going to say next? What sport am I covering? Just something as fundamental as that almost. But just constantly telling yourself to concentrate. Don't lose your focus. And the mistakes that I've made on air over the years have been because I have, and I think, if I was being honest, I think probably as you get older, doing those long programs gets harder because keeping the focus gets less easy. I think there's an obvious sort of progression there, but it's always about what I always said to myself going on air before any program, radio or television, is first 10 seconds. Get the first 10 seconds right. And if you can play, it's a bit, playing sport. You can worry about it till you're blue in the face. But the moment you walk on the court, on the field, whatever it might be, just play. Get the only thing I'd ever write, the only thing I'd ever script would be the first line. If you can deliver the first line, get it in your head. What's the first line? Get that right, and then you're off. And then concentrate. And then fall over at the end.
Fantastic. Well, it's been fantastic talking to you, John, and thank you so much for giving stuff to the Sporting Memories. And we'll hope that we'll see you back on the air soon. We'll see some sports soon. It'll be nice.
Well, I mean, I keep reading about what's going to happen or isn't going to happen with the Six Nations this year. And, anybody's guess is as good as mine. I mean, none of us know. But I do think, there's a lot, being desperately serious from it, there's a big, understandable moral debate about the rights and wrongs of sport taking place at the moment, given how so many other people's lives are being impacted and the walls are closing in and all that sort of stuff. But certainly for me, and I'm sure for a lot of other people like me who've got that kind of sporting gene within them, being able to watch live sport, even though there's nobody in the stadiums and all that sort of stuff, has been an absolute godsend. It really has. At a time when you are clutching at straws to make life seem uplifting and things like that, it's been absolutely fantastic. So I do hope the elite end of the game, rugby, football. I've watched more football in the last 10 months than I've probably cumulatively watched in the last. I could run down the Brentford starting 11. I'm just in it in a big way because it's kind of what's keeping me sane. And I just hope that at least is able to continue for as long as it has to until we can get back to normal.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot.